So you're wanting to look at building an editing PC, or you're knowing what you need to get for an editing PC. Well, I'm here to help you out. Let us begin. What's up guys, my name is Elijah Brooks with Brooks Film Studios, and I'm a videographer based out of North Carolina. And on this channel I do a lot of reviews on tech and equipment, along with some advice for videography in general. And so today we're talking about this machine. This is my personal editing machine that I've recently ended up building and been using for about 6 months. And I just want to give you some ideas of what I did with this, some recommendations, and kind of give you some ideas of, in general, what you need. Now let me start off the bat by saying you do not need something this powerful, especially if you're doing 1080p editing. You can get away with a lot less than this computer. So to take that with a grain of salt, you don't need this, but I'll give you some recommendations on what I would recommend. Now, just starting off with the case, you can get away with whatever case you want for this. I personally have something from Lian. I can't remember the exact model name, but I will try to put it here. But this case is beautiful. It has tempered glass panels, plenty of room for hard drives, and along with that, even the back of it looks nice with its cable management, and it also has a USB-C port at the top for connecting external drives. You can get away with any case. I would recommend either Lian, NZXT, or Fractal Design. Those are a lot of the really good case manufacturers. I even did a build recently in a Corsair Crystal for my friend Jordan. That case turned out beautiful as well. You can do pretty much whatever you want with the case. Not important, RGB does not mean more power. Now, starting off with the things that do matter. Let's start with the CPU. This is the brain of your computer. In this machine, I personally have a RYZEN 9 3900X. This CPU is a 12-core, 24-thread processor, and it is a beast. I have edited plenty of 4K projects. I have not tried doing RAW or anything like that, but I have done 4K 10-bit 422 on this, and it works perfectly fine. I have actually never seen this CPU maxed out. I believe the highest I've seen it is 60 to 75%, and that was running Premiere and Photoshop and Google Chrome at the same time. This CPU is fantastic. What I would recommend is you can either have this, you can go higher than this, which would be a RYZEN 9 3950X, or you can even go the newer generation Ryzen, which is the 5950X, which I believe that CPU right now is running around $800 if you can even find it, because 2021 PC parts are hard to find. So I would recommend either the recent gen or the last gen. Both of them work perfectly fine. Now, if you don't need as much power as I have, I would recommend a 3600X or a 3700X. These CPUs are either 6 or 8 cores for the CPU, and Linus Tech Tips even did a video on actually that specific CPU, and it worked fantastic for 4K editing. I just personally need a little bit more because I do more than 4K editing. Plus I'm dealing with weddings that have a lot of data to go through, so having that extra power is nice for me. I would go 8 cores and up just to future-proof yourself. That would be my personal opinion, but do what you need to do, because I too know what it's like to be broke. Who am I kidding? I'm still broke. Now, what does the CPU sit on? This is where we need to talk about the motherboard. Now, a lot of times when you're buying your CPU, you can get it bundled with a motherboard so that you know it specifically works with that processor. What I personally have chosen is a Asus Prime X570 Pro. This motherboard is fantastic for me because it does have USB-C for the front port and the back port, plus it does have plenty of space for expansion cards. You can add a Wi-Fi card in here because this board does not have Wi-Fi, but you can get a Wi-Fi card that's fairly easy to install. Now, the reason I do love this board is it has Gen 4 NVMe slots. Now, what that is basically there's different types of SSDs. NVMe attaches directly into the motherboard, and these are actually gives you much better speeds than SSDs you would run a cable to. Now, Gen 4 is the most recent version and the fastest version, which is fantastic for editing weddings, especially when you have large amounts of data you have to load in at a time. So I personally have a NVMe drive in my machine as well. And I'll go over how I actually have all my hard drive set up in a little bit later in this video. So you can go with whatever motherboard you need as long as it's compatible with your CPU. If you look up the motherboard, it should also give you CPU compatibility lists. Now moving on to RAM. RAM is very important, especially in video editing. You can use a good chunk of it. I would recommend bare minimum go 16 gigabytes of RAM, minimum. In this system right now, I have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, and this RAM is great. I haven't had any issues with it, and 32 gigabytes seems to do pretty good, especially for larger video edits. In most cases, I tend to hover around 17 to 20 gigabytes of RAM at the most, typically. Now I have seen it spike to more when loading in projects. Now, and you've seen in the B-roll, there's 2 slots I have empty, when that's because I can add in 2 more sticks and make it 64 gigabytes of RAM. Bare minimum goes 16 gigabytes, and you can upgrade to 32 or 64 as you need to. Now, next up we have the graphics card, possibly the hardest part about building a PC in 2021, because graphics cards are hard to come by and they're overpriced, because no stock is available. Now, in this system, I personally have a RTX 2080 Super. AMD does have the newer 3000 series cards, but those are being price gouged so much, and you can't find them at MSRP. So I would recommend just going ahead and getting the 20 series. They still work great. You don't really need a 2080 Super for video editing. You don't need that much. I would recommend anything from a GTX 1660 Super and up. Recommended, I would go for a 2060 or 2070 Super. The reason I recommend those, they have a little bit more VRAM, which sometimes you can end up using, especially if you do After Effects work, so that is recommended. But RTX 2080 Super is what I have in mind. I was able to find this at MSRP through eBay, but that was the only place I could find it, and it's a very basic card, doesn't have any RGB, but it is a good card. And a lot of my Premiere Pro errors have actually gone away since I upgraded this card, so there's that. Now moving on to hard drives, because you need somewhere to store all your files. You don't need as many as I have, but I actually have 4 hard drives in my computer. The first hard drive is a 1TB SSD that's on the back of the computer, and that 1TB SSD is one of the slower ones, but it does work good for what I need it to. It holds my operating system and my program files, so Premiere Pro and Photoshop. Now, the other drive that's beside it is a 500GB SSD, and that is solely dedicated as a cache drive for Premiere Pro. And a company called Puget Systems actually did some tests with this and found that a 3-drive setup is best for video editing. So have your operating system on one drive, a second drive is a cache drive, and then a third drive that holds all your actual video files. Now, you don't need this. You can get away with 1 drive and that would be just fine. I've did that for years, but I'm just telling you what my experience is, and I actually have noticed a little bit more speed with my computer when I did add those other drives. And then I have a third drive in my computer that is actually a 2TB drive in the bottom, and that drive is actually just used to hold all my games separate from my business stuff. So I do play games on the PC because I have a PC, why not? So I do have 2TB that hold all my games. Now you can actually use this as archive in your system if you would like. So you can actually have all your project files located in there as an archive and go get 4 or 8 terabytes as a drive. I personally, for an archive, use an 8TB external drive, and I can actually take that drive, put it in a fireproof safe, so in the event there was a fire, hopefully that would actually save my projects, because even when I film a wedding, I will dump all the footage and immediately back it up to that archive drive, so I always have the original footage if something ever went wrong with my entire computer. And then for the fourth and final drive, that is the NVMe drive that I was talking about that is installed in my motherboard. That is also 1TB, and that is what holds all my current projects. So any weddings I'm currently editing or any other client projects for corporate that I'm working on. Those can live on that drive. They are faster. Now, what I was doing before is I had my other two drives, so my cache and my Windows drive, and these are all external storage drives that I have used. The majority of these have been great. So this is the Samsung T5, very reliable, been around forever. This drive has been fantastic, never crashed, never disconnected. I have loved this drive, and actually this is what I pretty much use to pass footage on to my editor back and forth if I have to. So having this drive has been fantastic, very reliable, highly recommended. Samsung T5. Next up is a Crucial X8. This is a drive that is actually a little bit faster because the Samsung T5, I believe, is at 500 megabits a second. This one tops out around 1,000. Now, this has been a good drive. I love it. I've been editing a couple weddings off of this, and this drive has actually been pretty great and reliable, never disconnected. It does get a little warm, and you can tell the speeds will drop down a little bit to preserve itself sometimes, but overall, still very good drive. Now, this is a Samsung T7. I honestly, for video editing, especially 4K video editing with larger files, I don't necessarily recommend this drive. I have actually had this drive disconnect on me from where it overheated. So it would disconnect and then reconnect, and if you keep going, it'll disconnect and reconnect again because it's overheated. Because apparently the thermal system of this doesn't transfer out the heat very well. For photos, I feel like this will be just fine, or like just transferring footage, but for this, I honestly wouldn't really recommend this drive as much as the T5 or the Crucial X8. So those are my recommendations for a hard drive setup. Now in this computer, you also have to think about what's powering everything, so a power supply. I personally have a 650 watt power supply in this system, and it's done just fine. I would also recommend going higher than that. This is just what I already had on hand from previous builds. Now what I would recommend is anything 750 watts and up, so that way it gives you headroom in the event you want to upgrade your system. Especially with the NVIDIA 3000 series graphics cards, those typically recommend about 750 watts and up, and if you get like a 3090, you're really probably needing a 900 to 1000 watt power supply. So I would recommend going ahead and getting about an 800 watt power supply just to future proof yourself a little bit. And plus, you don't want to max out a power supply because their efficiency curve kind of goes down after 80%, which with my specs, I believe I'm well within those specs, but it's not a problem. You can always look up a power supply calculator, and you can actually plug in whatever thing you're putting into your system. It'll tell you what power supply is recommended and how much wattage you're drawing. And that is everything you would basically need for a video editing PC and my recommendations. Now, I'm not going to go over how to build it. There are plenty of other channels that do a way better job than I could. Linus Tech Tips, Bitwit, even Matt Johnson, who was a wedding videographer, did a how to build a PC. I might do one in the future, because I believe I'm probably looking at building my girlfriend a computer in the next probably six months to a year. So whenever that happens, probably going to video it, and she might be on the channel, who knows, we'll see. But I will also link to my recommendations down at the description. But that is all the recommendations I have for you. I hope this helped. If it did, leave me a comment. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment. I will try to get back to you. And please throw a like on the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.